The doors of the great hall burst open before Elena could even reach them, and the sound of her own name being shouted in anger froze her steps. "Stop her!" Two guards moved to block her path, and Elena's heart pounded as she realized the voice belonged to her own father. She was standing in her wedding dress, white lace trailing behind her on the marble floor, ready to walk toward the man she had loved since she was 16 years old. Alpha Damon Cross stood at the end of the aisle, tall and proud in his ceremonial coat, waiting for her, or so she had believed. "Edmund, what is the meaning of this?" Elena turned to her father, confusion written across her face. The entire pack had gathered inside the hall, hundreds of eyes now fixed on her, whispers rising like a wave. Edmund Hall did not look at his daughter with warmth. His eyes were cold, calculating, the same look he gave when negotiating trade deals with rival packs. "Elena, step aside. The wedding will continue, but not with you at the altar." For a moment, Elena thought she had misheard him. She looked past her father, toward the front of the hall, and that was when she saw her sister. Vivian stood near a side chamber, already dressed in a wedding gown identical to Elena's own, her dark hair pinned up with the same pearl combs Elena had chosen weeks earlier. Vivian's lips curled into a small, satisfied smile. "You can't be serious," Elena whispered. "This alliance is too important for sentiment," her father said, his voice loud enough for the crowd to hear, as though he were making an announcement rather than confessing a betrayal. "Vivian will marry Alpha Damon today. It has already been arranged with his council." Elena's eyes shot to Damon, silently begging him to say something, to deny it, to prove that this was some cruel misunderstanding. But Damon would not meet her gaze. His jaw was tight, his hands clenched at his sides, and though his eyes did flicker with something that looked like guilt, he said nothing. "Damon," Elena's voice cracked, "tell them this is wrong. Tell them we are mates." Silence answered her, a long, humiliating silence that stretched across the hall like a blade. It was Colin, Damon's beta and closest friend, who finally spoke, stepping forward with a look of discomfort. "Elena, the council decided that Vivian's bloodline offers stronger ties to the northern packs. It was not Damon's decision alone." "Not his decision alone," Elena repeated bitterly, "but he is standing there in silence, letting it happen." Two guards gripped her arms before she could take another step toward the altar. She fought against them, her wedding dress twisting around her legs, pearls scattering across the floor as one sleeve tore at the seam. The crowd did not move to help her. No one dared defy an Alpha's counsel, not even for the woman who had trained beside their warriors and healed their wounded for years. "Let go of me." Elena's voice rose, raw and desperate, but the guards only tightened their hold, dragging her back through the doors she had entered, with hope only minutes before. As she was pulled away, she caught one last glimpse of Vivian, stepping up to take her place at the altar, lifting the hem of the stolen gown with delicate fingers, her expression calm, almost bored, as if she had expected this outcome all along. Damon reached for Vivian's hand. Elena's stomach turned as she watched him do it without hesitation, without even a glance back toward her. The great doors slammed shut, cutting off the sound of the ceremony beginning inside. Elena was left standing in the corridor, her dress ruined, her dignity stripped away in front of everyone she had ever known. She did not cry, not yet. The shock was too large for tears. "Elena," a soft voice called her name from behind. She turned to see Nora, a young healer's assistant, and one of the few friends she had left, hurrying toward her with wide, frightened eyes. "I didn't know. I swear I didn't know they would do this." "Did anyone know?" Elena asked, her voice hollow. "Did the whole pack know, except me?" Nora hesitated, and that hesitation was answer enough. Elena walked away before Nora could explain further, her bare feet slapping against the cold stone floor since one of her shoes had been lost in the struggle. She did not know where she was walking, only that she needed to be far away from the sound of celebration that was surely beginning behind those heavy doors. She found herself in the garden behind the pack house, the same garden where she and Damon used to meet in secret when they were young and unsure of what the future held. The flowers were in full bloom, indifferent to the destruction of her life happening just meters away. She sank onto a stone bench and finally allowed herself to shake. Footsteps approached from behind, slow and heavy. Elena turned, expecting Nora again, but instead found her mother, Grace Hall, standing at the edge of the path with a shawl wrapped tightly around her shoulders, despite the warm evening air. "Mother," Elena stood, unsure whether to feel relief or anger. "Did you know about this too?" Grace's eyes were red-rimmed, and for a moment, Elena believed she saw genuine sorrow there. "I found out only this morning. Your father kept it from me because he knew I would try to stop it." "Why would he do this?" Elena asked, her voice breaking at last. "I have done everything asked of me. I trained. I served the pack. I loved him." "Your father believes strength is measured in alliances, not loyalty," Grace said quietly. "Vivian's mother comes from northern blood. Your father thinks that connection will protect our pack from the tension building along the border." "And what about me? What happens to me now?" Grace reached into the folds of her shawl and withdrew a small object wrapped in cloth. She pressed it into Elena's hands. It was a pendant, old and tarnished, shaped like a crescent moon with a single dark stone set at its center. "This belonged to your grandmother," Grace said. "She told me once that it responds to a true mate bond, one that cannot be arranged or broken by politics." "I always suspected Damon was never truly meant for you, Elena, no matter how much you both wanted it to be so. Your father has kept this from you for years because he did not want you searching for someone outside his control." Elena stared down at the pendant, turning it over in her trembling fingers. "You're saying Damon was never my true mate?" "I am saying that somewhere out there is someone the moon itself chose for you," Grace said. "But you cannot find him while you remain here. Your father will likely exile you now that Vivian has taken your place. You must leave before he does something worse." The words landed like another blow, but somewhere beneath the pain, Elena felt a small ember of resolve begin to glow. She would not stay in a place that had cast her aside so easily. She would not spend her life mourning a man who let her be dragged away without a single word in her defense. "Where should I go?" Elena asked. "South, toward the neutral lands," Grace said. "There are packs there who do not answer to your father's counsel. Take the forest path before dawn. I will make sure no one follows you tonight." Grace pulled her daughter into a tight embrace, and for a moment, Elena allowed herself to be comforted, to breathe in the familiar scent of her mother's perfume one last time. Then Grace stepped back, wiping her eyes quickly, and pressed a small pouch of coins and a traveling cloak into Elena's hands. "Be careful," Grace whispered. "And Elena, whatever you find out there, promise me, you will not let this pack's cruelty turn your heart to stone." Elena nodded, though she was not certain she could keep such a promise. Not tonight, with the wound still so fresh. She changed out of her ruined wedding dress in the small guest cottage near the garden, pulling on simple travel clothes and the cloak her mother had given her. She left the torn white gown crumpled on the floor, a symbol of the life she was leaving behind. The pendant she fastened around her neck, hidden beneath her collar, its cool weight resting against her skin like a promise she did not yet understand. As the moon rose high above the pack house, Elena slipped out through the servants' gate, moving quickly and quietly along the tree line. Behind her, faint sounds of music and celebration still drifted from the great hall, mocking her with every note. She did not look back. The forest path was dark and unfamiliar, but Elena had spent enough years training with the pack's warriors to know how to move silently through the trees, how to read the moonlight filtering through the branches, to guide her steps. Fear pulsed through her veins, but so did something else, something sharper and more determined. She had been humiliated, betrayed, and cast aside by everyone she trusted, but she was still alive, still strong, and she refused to let this be the end of her story. Hours passed as she walked, her legs aching, her thoughts spinning between grief and anger. She thought of Damon's silence, of Vivian's smug smile, of her father's cold eyes as he ordered the guards to drag her away. Each memory hardened something inside her, turning sorrow into steel. By the time the first light of dawn began to color the sky, Elena had crossed the boundary stones that marked the edge of her father's territory. She paused there for a long moment, looking back at the distant shape of the pack house on the horizon, its windows glowing faintly gold in the early light. "You will regret this," she whispered to the wind, though she did not know if she meant her father, her sister, or Damon. perhaps all three. Then she turned south, toward the neutral lands her mother had spoken of, toward an uncertain future that could not possibly be worse than the one she was leaving behind. The forest stretched endlessly ahead of her, shadows shifting between the trees, but Elena walked forward without hesitation. Whatever waited for her out there, she intended to meet it standing tall, not as the girl who had been humiliated in front of her entire pack, but as a woman ready to claim a future no one could steal from her again. Behind her, unseen in the darkness of the trees along the northern ridge, a pair of golden eyes watched her small figure disappear into the forest, tracking her scent on the wind with quiet, careful interest. 3 days had passed since Elena left her father's territory, and every one of those days had tested her in ways she never expected. The neutral lands were nothing like the well-guarded borders of home. Here, the forest was wild and unmarked, and Elena had learned quickly that survival meant trusting no one and staying alert every waking hour. She had traded her mother's coins for bread and a water skin at a small trading post 2 days earlier, careful to keep her hood raised and her face hidden. Word of a runaway daughter from the Hall pack would likely spread fast, and Elena had no interest in being recognized by anyone loyal to her father. On the morning of the 4th day, exhaustion finally caught up with her. Elena sat beneath a wide oak tree, her back against the rough bark, and allowed herself a moment of stillness. The pendant her mother had given her rested against her chest, and she found herself touching it often, as if its weight alone could steady her scattered thoughts. She thought of her father's voice ordering the guards to seize her. She thought of Vivian's calm smile as she stepped into the place that should have belonged to Elena. Most of all, she thought of Damon's silence, the way he had looked away instead of defending her. "I trusted you," she murmured to no one, her voice barely more than a breath. "I trusted all of you." A twig snapped somewhere behind her, and Elena's body tensed instantly, years of training taking over before fear could paralyze her. She rose to her feet in one smooth motion, scanning the trees. "Who's there?" she called, her voice steady despite the pounding of her heart. No answer came, only the rustle of leaves in the wind. Elena reached for the small dagger she kept hidden in her boot, a habit from her training days that she was grateful for now. She moved cautiously, circling the clearing, her senses straining to detect any threat. That was when she heard the growl. It was low and guttural, unmistakably the sound of a shifted wolf, and it was close. Too close. Elena spun toward the sound, just as a massive gray wolf emerged from the underbrush, its eyes wild and its fur matted with dirt. This was not a wolf from any organized pack. Its movements were erratic, its posture aggressive in a way that suggested it belonged to no territory at all. One of the rogues that roamed the neutral lands, preying on travelers foolish enough to wander alone. "Easy," Elena said softly, though her grip on the dagger tightened. "I don't want trouble." The wolf did not care what she wanted, it lunged. Elena barely managed to dodge to the side, the wolf's jaws snapping shut just inches from her arm. She rolled across the forest floor, scrambling back to her feet as adrenaline flooded her body. She had trained for years alongside her father's warriors, but she had never faced a rogue wolf alone, without backup, without the protection of a pack behind her. The wolf circled her now, growling low, saliva dripping from its bared teeth. Elena kept her dagger raised, her back against the oak tree to prevent it from attacking from behind. Her mind raced, searching for any advantage, any way to survive this encounter. The wolf lunged again, and this time Elena was ready. She slashed with her dagger, catching its shoulder as she twisted away, but the blow only enraged the creature further. It snapped at her leg, and though she managed to avoid its teeth, its claws raked across her calf, tearing through fabric and skin alike. Elena cried out, pain shooting up her leg as she stumbled. The wolf pressed its advantage, closing in for what would surely be a fatal strike, when a second, far larger shape crashed through the trees and slammed into it from the side. Elena watched, stunned, as a massive black wolf pinned the rogue to the ground with terrifying speed and strength. The battle was brief and brutal, ending with a sharp yelp as the rogue wolf broke free and fled into the underbrush, clearly recognizing it had no chance against the newcomer. Elena's legs gave out, and she sank to the ground, clutching her injured calf as blood soaked through her torn pants. The black wolf turned toward her, its golden eyes studying her with an intensity that made her breath catch despite her pain and fear. Then, before her eyes, the wolf began to shift, bones and muscle rearranging in a smooth, practiced motion, until a man stood before her instead. He was tall, with dark hair and sharp features, dressed only in loose trousers that had clearly been tied to his leg before the shift, a common practice among experienced shifters who traveled without extra clothing. "You're injured," he said, his voice deep and controlled, though there was an edge of concern beneath the calm exterior. He knelt beside her, examining the wound on her leg, without asking permission, his hands surprisingly gentle, despite their obvious strength. "I can manage," Elena said, though her voice wavered as another wave of pain rolled through her leg. "You can barely stand." He tore a strip of fabric from his own shirt and began binding the wound with efficient, practiced movements. "This will need proper treatment soon, but this should stop the worst of the bleeding for now." Elena studied him carefully as he worked, noting the confidence in his movements, the way he carried himself, even in this simple act of kindness. There was something commanding about him, something that made her instincts whisper that this was not an ordinary traveler. "Thank you," she said finally, once he had finished binding her wound. "You saved my life." "You handled yourself well against that rogue," he said, meeting her eyes for the first time since his transformation. Most travelers freeze the moment they see a shifted wolf. "You fought." "I was trained to fight," Elena said, unwilling to reveal more than necessary about her past. "Who are you?" Something flickered across his face, a brief hesitation before he answered. "A traveler, like you, passing through these lands." Elena did not believe him, not entirely, but she was too exhausted and in too much pain to press the matter further. "I appreciate your help, but I should continue on my way." "You can barely walk," he pointed out, his tone firm but not unkind. "There's a town not far from here with a healer who can treat that wound properly. I'll take you there." Elena hesitated, torn between her instinct to trust no one and the practical reality that she could not travel far on an injured leg without proper care. Finally, exhaustion and pain won out over caution. "All right," she said quietly. "Thank you." He helped her to her feet, allowing her to lean on him as they made their way through the forest. Elena studied him from the corner of her eye as they walked, noting the careful way he scanned their surroundings, alert to any further danger, and the quiet authority in his voice whenever he spoke, as though he was accustomed to being obeyed without question. "You mentioned dangerous eyes watching my family's pack," Elena said suddenly, remembering something he had murmured when he first appeared, words she had barely registered through her pain and fear. "What did you mean by that?" His expression grew guarded. "It was nothing. A traveler's rumor, nothing more." Elena did not press further, sensing that he would reveal nothing more on the matter, but she filed the words away carefully. There was more to this stranger than he was willing to share, and something about the way his golden eyes studied the horizon told her he carried burdens far heavier than a simple traveler ever would. They walked for nearly an hour before the trees finally thinned, revealing a small town nestled in a valley below, smoke rising from chimneys and the distant sound of a marketplace carrying on the wind. Elena felt relief wash over her at the sight of civilization, though her leg throbbed with every step. "There," the stranger said, pointing toward the town. "The healer's house is near the center square. I'll take you there myself." As they descended the hillside path toward the town, Elena found herself studying his profile again, the sharp line of his jaw, the way his eyes never stopped scanning their surroundings, even now that danger seemed to have passed. She did not know his name, did not know why he had appeared so suddenly to save her life, but something about his presence felt significant in a way she could not yet explain. "I never got your name," she said, as they reached the edge of town. He paused, considering her for a long moment before answering. "Adrian," he said simply. "And yours?" "Elena," she replied, deciding that a first name alone was safe enough to share. "Elena," he repeated, as though testing the sound of it. Something shifted in his expression, subtle but unmistakable, though Elena could not identify what it meant. "Come, let's get that wound treated before it worsens." As they walked into the bustling town square, Elena had no way of knowing that the man walking beside her, the one who had appeared out of nowhere to save her life, was far more than a simple traveler passing through neutral lands. She could not have imagined that his territory stretched far beyond anything her father's pack could claim, or that the golden eyes which had watched her disappear into the forest days earlier belonged to the very same man now guiding her carefully through the crowded streets. For now, she only knew that fate, or perhaps something greater than fate, had placed this stranger in her path at the exact moment she needed him most. And despite everything she had lost, despite the betrayal that still burned fresh in her heart, Elena felt a small, cautious flicker of curiosity about the man walking beside her, wondering who he truly was beneath the calm and controlled exterior he presented to the world. The healer's house smelled of dried herbs and burning candles, a small stone building tucked between a bakery and a blacksmith shop at the edge of the town square. Elena sat on a wooden table, while an elderly woman named Marta examined her wounded leg with practiced hands, muttering under her breath about reckless travelers wandering the neutral lands alone. "You're lucky this man found you," Marta said, glancing toward Adrian, who stood near the doorway with his arms crossed, watching the treatment with quiet intensity. "Rogue wolves have been more aggressive lately. Something has stirred them up along the northern border." "Stirred them up how?" Elena asked, wincing as Marta cleaned the wound with a sharp-smelling tincture. Marta shook her head. "Territory disputes, most likely. There's been talk of a growing conflict brewing between several packs to the north. Whatever the cause, it's made the neutral lands more dangerous than they've been in years." Elena glanced at Adrian, remembering his earlier words about dangerous eyes watching her family's pack. She wondered if this conflict Marta spoke of was connected to whatever secret he was keeping. "There," Marta said finally, tying off a clean bandage around Elena's calf. "The wound isn't deep, but you'll need to rest and keep weight off it for a few days. No more running through forests. Understood?" "Understood," Elena said, though she doubted rest was a luxury she could afford for long. Adrian paid the healer before Elena could object, waving away her protests with a firm shake of his head. "You saved my journey from being far more complicated than it needed to be," he said simply, though Elena suspected there was more meaning behind his words than he let on. Outside the healer's house, the town square bustled with afternoon activity. Merchants called out prices for their goods, children ran between stalls, and the smell of fresh bread drifted from a nearby bakery. Elena leaned against a wooden post, testing her weight on her injured leg, while Adrian watched with obvious concern. "You should rest here for the night," he said. "There's an inn nearby. I'll arrange a room." "You've already done more than enough," Elena said, though a part of her did not want him to leave. Something about his steady presence made her feel safer than she had felt in days, safer even than she had felt within her own pack in the weeks leading up to her betrayal. "It's no trouble," Adrian said, and something in his tone told her the matter was already decided. They walked together toward a modest inn at the edge of the square, and Elena found herself telling him fragments of her story as they walked, unable to keep the words contained any longer. She spoke of the wedding that never happened, of her sister stealing her place at the altar, of her father's cold betrayal, and her mother's quiet act of rebellion in helping her escape. She left out the details of exactly which pack she came from, still cautious, despite the trust growing between them, but she spoke of Damon's silence with a bitterness that surprised even herself. Adrian listened without interrupting, his expression unreadable, though Elena noticed his jaw tighten whenever she described the moment the guards dragged her from the hall. "He said nothing?" Adrian asked when she finished. "Not a single word in your defense?" "Nothing," Elena confirmed. "He just stood there and let it happen." "That is not the mark of a true alpha," Adrian said, his voice low and edged with something that sounded almost like anger. "A man who cannot defend the woman standing before him does not deserve to call himself one." Elena studied him, surprised by the intensity of his reaction to a story that had nothing to do with him. "You speak as though you understand what it means to lead," she observed. Something flickered across his face again, that same brief hesitation she had noticed before. "I have seen enough leadership, both good and poor, to know the difference," he said carefully, deflecting without fully answering her unspoken question. They reached the inn, and Adrian arranged a room for her with quiet efficiency, speaking to the innkeeper in a tone that carried an unmistakable note of authority, though Elena could not place why a simple traveler would command such immediate respect from a stranger. The innkeeper's demeanor shifted the moment Adrian spoke, his posture straightening, his voice taking on a deferential quality that seemed entirely out of proportion to the situation. "You'll be safe here tonight," Adrian said once the arrangements were made. "I have matters to attend to nearby, but I will return in the morning to make sure you're recovering well." "You don't have to do that," Elena said, though she found herself hoping he would anyway. "I want to," Adrian replied simply, and the honesty in his voice caught her off guard. That night, Elena lay awake in the small inn room, her leg throbbing beneath its bandage, her mind spinning with everything that had happened over the past several days. She thought of Damon's silence, of her father's betrayal, and found that the pain of those memories had dulled slightly, replaced by confusion over the strange pull she felt toward the mysterious man who had saved her life. She touched the pendant beneath her collar, remembering her mother's words about a true mate bond that could not be arranged or broken by politics. She did not understand why the memory of Adrian's golden eyes lingered so persistently in her thoughts, or why the sound of his voice had settled something restless inside her chest that had been shaking since the moment the guards dragged her from the hall. Morning came, and true to his word, Adrian appeared at her door not long after sunrise, carrying a small basket of food from the market. Elena's leg felt stronger, though still tender, and she managed to walk without leaning heavily on furniture for support. "You look better," Adrian observed, studying her with an intensity that made her cheeks warm despite herself. "Marta's medicine works quickly," Elena said, accepting the bread and fruit he offered from the basket. They sat together near the window, sharing the simple meal in comfortable silence for a while, before Elena spoke again. "You still haven't told me where you're traveling to, or why you were in that part of the forest when the rogue attacked." Adrian set down the piece of bread he had been holding, his expression growing serious. "I travel often through the neutral lands, checking on matters that concern my territory's safety. The rogue activity has been increasing, and I wanted to see the extent of it myself, rather than relying only on reports." "Your territory," Elena repeated slowly. "So you do belong to a pack." "I belong to more than a pack," Adrian said, choosing his words with obvious care. "But I would rather not discuss the details until I know I can trust the person I'm discussing them with." Elena felt a flicker of frustration at his continued evasiveness, but she understood the caution in his words. She, too, had kept details of her own past hidden, unwilling to trust a stranger with the full truth of her identity until she felt certain it was safe to do so. "That seems fair," she said finally, "though I hope you understand the same caution applies to me." "Of course," Adrian said, something like respect flickering in his golden eyes. Trust should never be given carelessly. They spent the rest of the morning discussing lighter matters, and Elena found herself laughing for the first time in days at a story Adrian told about a particularly stubborn horse that had once refused to cross a bridge no matter how much coaxing was offered. The sound of her own laughter surprised her, a foreign and welcome sensation after the darkness of the past week. As the afternoon approached, Adrian grew more serious. "I have to return to my territory soon," he said. "Matters there require my attention, and I cannot delay much longer." Elena felt an unexpected pang of disappointment at the thought of him leaving, though she quickly reminded herself that they were strangers who had known each other for less than 2 days. "I understand," she said. "Thank you again for everything you've done." Adrian studied her for a long moment, something conflicted passing behind his eyes. "Elena," he said finally, "come with me." The words caught her completely off guard. "What?" "My territory is a place of safety, far from whatever conflict exists between you and your former pack," Adrian said, his voice steady despite the unusual nature of the offer. "You would be protected there, and given time to decide what you truly want for your future, without the pressure of survival weighing on every decision." Elena hesitated, torn between caution and the undeniable pull she felt toward this man who had saved her life, and asked for nothing in return except her trust. "I don't even know what your territory is called," she said slowly, "or who truly rules it." Adrian's expression grew solemn, and for a moment, Elena thought he might finally reveal the truth he had been withholding since they first met. Instead, he simply said, "You will know soon enough, if you choose to come." I only ask that you trust me a little further, Elena. I promise you will not regret it. Elena looked down at the pendant resting against her chest, thinking of her mother's words about fate and true bonds that could not be broken by politics or betrayal. She thought of Damon's silence, of her father's cold eyes, of everything she had lost, and everything she had yet to discover about herself and her future. "All right," she said finally, meeting Adrian's golden eyes with newfound resolve. "I'll come with you." Something like relief and quiet triumph flickered across Adrian's face, though he quickly masked it beneath his usual composed expression. "Then we should leave before nightfall," he said. "The journey to my territory will take the better part of 2 days." As they gathered their belongings and prepared to leave the small town behind, Elena felt a strange mixture of fear and anticipation settling in her chest. She had no way of knowing what truly awaited her at the end of this journey, or that the man walking beside her carried a title far greater than she could have imagined, one that would soon change the entire course of her life, in ways she never could have predicted. The journey to Adrian's territory took them through terrain that grew increasingly unfamiliar to Elena, the neutral lands giving way to dense forests, and eventually to rolling hills marked with stone boundary markers, unlike any she had seen before. As they traveled, Elena noticed subtle signs of organization and strength surrounding them: patrol trails carefully maintained, watch posts positioned at strategic points along the ridgelines, and the occasional glimpse of shifted wolves moving through the trees with disciplined precision. "Your territory seems well protected," Elena observed as they crested a hill overlooking a wide valley. "Protection is a priority," Adrian said simply, though his eyes swept the horizon with the same watchful alertness she had noticed since the moment they met. By late afternoon on the second day, they reached a border marked by an impressive stone archway, far grander than anything Elena had seen at her father's territory. Guards stationed at the entrance straightened immediately upon seeing Adrian approach, bowing their heads with unmistakable respect before opening the heavy gates without a word of challenge. Elena's confusion deepened as they continued through the territory, passing well-maintained roads, thriving farmland, and eventually, a grand palace rising in the distance, its towers catching the golden light of the setting sun. The scale of it dwarfed anything Elena had known within her father's more modest pack house. "Adrian," she said slowly, stopping in her tracks, "who exactly are you?" He paused beside her, his expression carefully composed as he finally met her questioning gaze directly. "I am Adrian Vale," he said, "Alpha King of these territories, and of the packs that answer to this crown." The words landed with the force of a physical blow. Elena stared at him, pieces suddenly falling into place: the guard's immediate deference, the innkeeper's nervous respect, the disciplined patrols she had noticed throughout their journey. She had been traveling alongside one of the most powerful figures in the entire region, and he had said nothing. "You should have told me," she said, anger and disbelief warring in her voice. "Would you have trusted me if I had told you the moment we met?" Adrian asked quietly. "Or would you have assumed I wanted something from you? Some political advantage tied to your family's pack?" Elena wanted to argue, but she could not deny the truth in his words. Given everything she had endured, discovering that a powerful Alpha King had approached her with an offer of protection so soon after her humiliation would have raised every defensive instinct she possessed. "I still should have known," she said, though her anger had softened into something closer to unease. "You know now," Adrian said, "and I meant every word of my offer. You are safe here, Elena, regardless of your family's standing or your past. No one within these walls will threaten you or force your hand in matters you do not choose for yourself." Elena studied him carefully, searching for any sign of deception, but found only quiet sincerity in his golden eyes. Slowly, some of the tension eased from her shoulders. "All right," she said finally, "but I expect honesty from you moving forward, Adrian. No more secrets." "You have my word," he said, and something in his tone told her he meant it completely. They continued toward the palace, and Elena found herself growing increasingly aware of the stares following their arrival, palace staff and warriors alike, pausing to watch the Alpha King return, with an unfamiliar woman at his side. Whispers followed in their wake, though none dared speak loudly enough for Elena to catch more than fragments. Inside the palace, Adrian led her through grand corridors lined with tapestries, depicting the history of his territory, past a great hall far larger than the one Elena had been dragged from days earlier, and finally to a set of guest chambers positioned near the eastern wing. "You'll stay here," Adrian said, opening the door to reveal a spacious room decorated in warm tones, a large window overlooking the palace gardens below. "My staff will bring anything you require. Rest tonight, and we can discuss matters further tomorrow." "Thank you," Elena said, still somewhat overwhelmed by the sudden shift in her circumstances. "For all of this." Adrian lingered in the doorway a moment longer than necessary, his expression unreadable. "Elena," he said finally, "I know your trust in leadership has been badly damaged by recent events. I do not expect you to trust me completely, not yet, but I hope, in time, I can prove myself different from the man who failed to defend you." Something in his sincerity touched a place inside Elena that she had thought permanently hardened by Damon's betrayal. "Thank you, Adrian," she said softly, "for everything." He nodded once, then departed, leaving Elena alone in the quiet luxury of the guest chamber. She moved to the window, watching the last light of sunset paint the palace gardens in shades of amber and rose, her mind still reeling from the revelation of Adrian's true identity. An Alpha King, the most powerful title any shifter could hold, ruling not over a single pack, but over an entire network of territories that answered to his authority. And he had found her, injured and vulnerable in the neutral lands, without any knowledge of who she truly was or what political weight her family name carried. That evening, a young woman named Nora, coincidentally sharing a name with the friend Elena had left behind, arrived with a tray of food and fresh clothing, chattering cheerfully about palace life as she helped Elena settle in. Elena learned quickly that the palace staff held Adrian in extremely high regard, describing him as fair, strong, and deeply committed to the welfare of every pack under his protection. "He doesn't often bring guests to the palace," the young woman mentioned, as she folded fresh linens near the bed. "You must be someone special to him." Elena felt heat rise in her cheeks at the implication. "We only just met a few days ago," she said quickly. "He helped me after an attack in the neutral lands." The young woman's expression grew thoughtful, though she said nothing further on the matter, simply offering a small smile before excusing herself for the evening. Alone again, Elena settled onto the soft bed, exhaustion from the journey finally catching up with her. As she drifted toward sleep, her thoughts lingered on Adrian's golden eyes, on the quiet strength in his voice, and on the strange, undeniable pull she had felt toward him since the moment he first appeared, to save her life in the forest. She thought too of Damon, and found that the memory of his silence no longer carried the same sharp, immediate pain it once had. Something had shifted within her over these past few days, a slow but steady realization that perhaps her heart had been searching for something Damon could never have given her, even if her father's betrayal had never occurred. The following morning, Elena woke to sunlight streaming through the window and the distant sound of activity within the palace grounds. She dressed in the simple, but well-made clothing Nora had left for her, and made her way cautiously through the corridors, curious to explore more of the territory that had become her unexpected sanctuary. She found Adrian in a courtyard near the training grounds, watching a group of young warriors practice combat drills with a critical but encouraging eye. He noticed her approach and offered a small smile, one that seemed more genuine and relaxed than any expression she had seen from him during their journey. "Sleep well?" he asked. "Better than I expected," Elena admitted. "This place is beautiful, Adrian. I didn't expect such kindness after everything that happened." "Kindness should not be a rarity," Adrian said, his eyes drifting briefly toward the training warriors before returning to her. "Though I understand why it might feel unfamiliar to you, given recent circumstances." They walked together through the training grounds, and Adrian introduced her to several of his advisors and warriors, each greeting her with polite curiosity, though clearly uncertain of her exact role within the palace. Elena noticed the way conversations seemed to pause slightly whenever they passed, whispers following in their wake much as they had the previous evening. "They're curious about you," Adrian said, noticing her discomfort. "It isn't often I bring anyone to the palace personally." "Why did you?" Elena asked directly, finally voicing the question that had lingered since their first conversation in the small town. "You could have simply directed me toward the healer and continued on your own journey. Why bring me here?" To your home, to the center of your entire territory. Adrian stopped walking, turning to face her fully, his expression more open and unguarded than she had yet seen it. Honestly, Elena, I am still asking myself the same question, he admitted. There is something about you that I cannot quite explain. A pull I have never experienced before, not with any other person I have encountered in my life. Elena's breath caught at the raw honesty in his words, her hand instinctively rising to touch the pendant hidden beneath her collar, remembering her mother's words about a bond that could not be arranged or broken by politics. I feel it too, she admitted quietly, surprising herself with the confession. I don't understand it, but I feel it. Something shifted in Adrian's golden eyes, warmth and restrained intensity mingling together as he studied her in the soft morning light. Neither of them spoke further on the matter, though the unspoken acknowledgement hung between them, fragile and new, as they continued their walk through the palace grounds, both aware that something significant had begun to take root between them, something neither of them fully understood yet, but something that neither of them wished to ignore. Weeks passed within the palace walls, and Elena found herself settling into a rhythm she had never expected to discover after the humiliation of her stolen wedding. Each morning, she trained alongside the palace warriors, her skills sharpening under the guidance of instructors, far more experienced than any she had known within her father's pack. Each afternoon, she found herself drawn toward the courtyard, where Adrian often reviewed reports from his advisors, their conversations growing longer and more comfortable with each passing day. Gideon, Adrian's most trusted advisor, watched the growing closeness between them with a mixture of curiosity and quiet concern. He was an older man, gray at the temples, with sharp eyes that missed very little happening within the palace. You spend a great deal of time with our guest, Gideon observed one afternoon, finding Adrian alone in his study after Elena had departed following their daily conversation. Is that a problem? Adrian asked, though his tone carried a note of challenge rather than genuine question. Not a problem, Gideon said carefully, but perhaps a concern, given your position. The council will want answers regarding her identity and intentions, especially once word spreads further of her presence here. Her name is Elena, Adrian said firmly, and she deserves better than to be discussed as though she were merely a political variable. Gideon studied his king for a long moment, noting the protective edge in his voice, an edge he had rarely heard Adrian use when discussing anyone outside his closest circle. You care for her, Gideon said, not quite a question. Adrian did not answer immediately, his gaze drifting toward the window that overlooked the gardens where Elena often walked in the late afternoon sunlight. I have never felt anything like what I feel around her, he admitted finally. It defies explanation, Gideon. Every instinct within me recognizes something in her that I cannot ignore. Gideon's expression softened slightly. Then perhaps it would be wise to determine the truth of that recognition before matters grow more complicated. A bond of that nature is not something to dismiss lightly, nor is it something that should remain hidden from her much longer. Adrian nodded slowly, understanding the wisdom in his advisor's words, though uncertain how to broach such a delicate matter with a woman who had so recently been betrayed by the very idea of fated bonds and promised futures. That evening, a formal gathering was held within the Great Hall to welcome several visiting delegates from allied territories, an event that required Elena's presence as Adrian's guest. She dressed in a deep blue gown provided by the palace staff, her hair styled elegantly for the first time since her disastrous wedding day, and found herself surprisingly nervous as she prepared to enter the crowded hall. The gathering was grand, filled with music, laughter, and the quiet hum of political conversation among the assembled delegates and pack representatives. Elena remained close to Adrian's side throughout much of the evening, growing more comfortable with each introduction, each polite conversation, with visiting dignitaries, curious about her presence within the Alpha King's court. It was during a lull in the festivities, as Adrian guided her toward a quieter corner of the hall to escape the crowd for a moment, that everything changed. The moment their bodies drew close together, away from the noise and distraction of the gathering, a sudden wave of warmth surged through Elena's chest, radiating outward from where the pendant rested against her skin. She gasped softly, one hand flying to her chest as the sensation intensified, unmistakable and undeniable. Adrian froze beside her, his own expression shifting to one of stunned recognition as the same overwhelming pull settled deep within him, an awareness of her presence so complete and consuming that it silenced every other thought in his mind. "You feel that?" Elena whispered, her voice barely audible above the distant music. "Yes," Adrian said, his golden eyes locked onto hers with an intensity that made her breath catch. "Elena, I believe we are mates." The words hung in the air between them, heavy with implication and possibility. Elena's mind raced backward through every strange sensation she had felt since first meeting him in the forest. The inexplicable pull, the comfort she found so easily in his presence, the way her heart had settled the moment she agreed to travel to his territory. "How is that possible?" she asked, though even as she spoke, some deep instinctive part of her already understood the truth of it. "The bond does not always announce itself immediately," Adrian said, his voice quiet, but steady, despite the obvious emotion beneath his words. "Sometimes it grows slowly, revealing itself only when both parties are ready to recognize it fully." Elena thought of her mother's words about the pendant responding to a true mate bond, one that could not be arranged or broken by politics. She thought of Damon's silence, of the humiliation she had endured believing herself destined for a future that was never truly hers. "I'm frightened," she admitted honestly, meeting Adrian's gaze without flinching from the vulnerability in her own voice. "I believed myself bonded to Damon for years, and I was wrong. How can I trust this feeling now?" Adrian reached for her hand, holding it gently but firmly, his thumb tracing a slow, reassuring pattern across her knuckles. "I will not force this bond upon you, Elena, nor will I pressure you toward anything you are not ready for," he said. "But I will not walk away from what I feel, simply because fear whispers caution. I intend to court you properly, to earn your trust and your heart through patience and honesty, not through the mere existence of a bond neither of us fully chose." Elena felt tears gathering in her eyes, though these were unlike the tears of humiliation and grief she had shed on the day of her stolen wedding. These felt different, born from a fragile, hesitant hope she had believed permanently destroyed. "I would like that," she said softly. "To be courted properly, without the pressure of arrangements or politics deciding my future for me." Adrian's expression softened into something warm and genuine, a small smile touching his lips, as he raised her hand and pressed a gentle kiss against her knuckles. "Then that is exactly what I intend to do," he said. "Starting tonight." The remainder of the evening passed in a blur of quiet conversation and stolen glances, Elena finding herself laughing more freely than she had in longer than she could remember, the weight of her past betrayal beginning to lift, if only slightly, beneath the warmth of Adrian's steady attention. Meanwhile, far to the north within her father's territory, tension had begun to fracture the marriage that had been built upon deception and stolen vows. Vivian sat alone in the chambers she now shared with Damon, staring at her reflection in a mirror that seemed to mock her with every passing day. The pack had grown restless in the weeks following the wedding, whispers spreading among the warriors and elders alike that something felt wrong about their new Luna, that the bond between Vivian and their alpha lacked the strength and resonance expected of true mates. Damon himself had grown increasingly distant, his eyes often clouded with something that looked uncomfortably like doubt whenever he looked upon his new wife. "You seem troubled," Damon said, entering the chamber and finding Vivian still seated before her mirror, her expression tight with barely concealed frustration. "The pack does not accept me," Vivian said sharply, turning to face him. "They whisper behind my back, question my place at your side. What more do they want from me?" Damon's jaw tightened, though he said nothing immediately, his silence carrying an uncomfortable weight that had grown more frequent between them in recent weeks. "Perhaps," he said finally, choosing his words with obvious care, "the pack senses something I have been reluctant to acknowledge myself." Vivian's eyes narrowed. "What are you suggesting?" "I feel nothing when I look at you, Vivian," Damon admitted quietly, the confession clearly paining him despite its honesty. "No pull, no bond, nothing beyond the arrangement your father and my council negotiated. I had hoped it might grow with time, but weeks have passed, and I feel no different than I did on our wedding day." Vivian rose from her seat, anger flashing across her features. "And what of Elena? Did you feel something for her that you refused to feel for me?" Damon's silence answered the question more clearly than words ever could, and Vivian's expression twisted with a bitter combination of jealousy and dawning realization that the plan she and her father had orchestrated might not have secured the future she had believed it would. "She is gone, Damon," Vivian said finally, her voice sharp with warning. "Whatever you felt or believed you felt for my sister does not matter anymore. I am your wife now, chosen by the council for the good of this pack, and that will not change regardless of how you feel." But even as she spoke the words, Vivian could not ignore the small, creeping doubt beginning to take root within her own heart. A fear that the foundation she had built her new life upon might be far less stable than she had ever allowed herself to believe. 2 months had passed since the night Elena and Adrian first acknowledged the bond between them, and in that time, their relationship had grown steadily, built upon patience, honesty, and a growing trust that neither of them took for granted. Adrian had kept his promise to court her properly, taking her on quiet walks through the palace gardens, sharing meals filled with easy conversation, and never once pressuring her toward anything beyond what she felt ready to embrace. Elena had grown stronger during these months, both in body and spirit. Her training had progressed remarkably under the palace instructors, and the warriors who once viewed her with curious uncertainty now regarded her with genuine respect, impressed by her dedication and natural skill. She had made friends among the palace staff, including Nora, who had become something of a confidant during the quiet evenings when Adrian was occupied with matters of governance. Yet despite the growing peace she had found within the palace walls, Elena still carried the weight of her past, the humiliation of her stolen wedding, and the uncertainty of what her family might do once they learned of her new circumstances. She had shared every detail of her past with Adrian by now, and he had listened with quiet fury on her behalf. Though he had never once suggested using his power to seek retribution against her family without her explicit wish for it. "You've grown quiet," Adrian observed one evening as they walked together through the gardens beneath a sky filled with stars. "What troubles you?" Elena considered her words carefully before answering. "I keep waiting for something to go wrong," she admitted. "Every time I begin to feel truly happy here, some part of me expects it to be taken away, just as everything was taken from me before." Adrian stopped walking, turning to face her fully, his expression gentle but serious. "Elena, I understand why you carry that fear, but I promise you, what exists between us was not arranged by councils or politics. It was chosen by something far greater than either of our family's ambitions. I will not let anyone take this from you, from us." "You can't promise that," Elena said softly, though there was no real challenge in her words, only lingering vulnerability. "I can promise that I will fight for it," Adrian said firmly. "Every single day, if that is what it takes." Elena felt the familiar warmth bloom in her chest, the same sensation she had felt the night they first acknowledged their bond, though now it had grown steadier, deeper, woven into the very fabric of her daily life, rather than existing as a startling revelation. It was during a formal pack gathering held the following week, one that brought together representatives from several territories under Adrian's protection, that the bond between them was tested in a way neither of them had anticipated. The gathering was held to discuss growing concerns about rogue activity along the northern borders, the same activity Marta the Healer had mentioned months earlier during Elena's recovery. Alpha representatives from various territories filled the Great Hall, their conversations filled with concern and strategic planning, as they discussed how best to address the escalating threat. Elena stood near Adrian's side throughout much of the proceedings, listening carefully as reports were shared regarding increased rogue attacks, unexplained territorial incursions, and whispers of a growing force gathering somewhere beyond the mapped borders of the known packs. It was during a break in the formal discussions that the mate bond revealed itself in a way impossible to hide from the gathered representatives. As Adrian moved through the crowd, discussing matters with several visiting alphas, Elena found herself instinctively drawn toward him, an invisible thread pulling her steps in his direction despite her attempts to maintain appropriate distance during what was, after all, a formal political gathering. When their eyes met across the crowded hall, the pull intensified to an undeniable degree, warmth radiating between them so powerfully that several nearby representatives turned to observe the sudden, charged silence that fell over that section of the hall. "Alpha King," one of the visiting representatives said carefully, studying the obvious connection passing between Adrian and Elena with keen interest. Might I ask about the nature of your relationship with this woman? Adrian did not hesitate, crossing the remaining distance to stand beside Elena, his hand finding hers with quiet confidence, despite the many eyes now watching their exchange. Elena is my mate, he said clearly, his voice carrying across the hall with unmistakable pride and certainty. I intend to formally declare our bond before this court, and I hope each of you will recognize and honor that declaration. Murmurs spread through the assembled representatives, some expressions curious, others clearly surprised by the sudden and public nature of the announcement. Elena felt her heart pounding, both from the intensity of Adrian's declaration and from the weight of so many eyes suddenly upon her, evaluating her worth as a potential future queen of territories far greater than anything her own family had ever controlled. Adrian, she whispered, uncertain how to respond to the magnitude of what had just occurred in front of the entire gathered court. I meant every word, he said quietly, meeting her eyes with unwavering conviction. I am done hiding what I feel for you, Elena. You deserve to be seen, valued, and claimed openly, not hidden away as though our bond were something to be ashamed of. Tears gathered in Elena's eyes, though she blinked them back quickly, unwilling to appear vulnerable in front of the watching representatives. Instead, she straightened her shoulders and met the curious gazes surrounding them with newfound confidence. I accept this bond, she said clearly, her voice steady, despite the trembling she felt inside. And I am honored to stand beside Adrian, both as his mate and, should circumstances allow, as queen of these territories. A moment of stunned silence followed her declaration, before scattered applause began among the gathered representatives, several alphas nodding with visible approval at the strength and clarity Elena had displayed in her response. Whatever doubts some might have carried regarding her worthiness seemed to dissolve in the face of her composed, dignified acceptance of a role that would carry immense responsibility. Gideon, watching from near the front of the hall, allowed himself a rare, satisfied smile at the sight of his king finally claiming happiness alongside his duty, a combination that had eluded Adrian for longer than most within the palace realized. Later that evening, once the formal gathering had concluded and most representatives had retired to their assigned chambers, Elena and Adrian found themselves alone once again in the quiet solitude of the palace gardens, the same place where their bond had first been acknowledged months earlier. That was not how I planned to make such an announcement, Adrian admitted, a rare note of sheepishness in his voice as he reached for her hand. But watching you across that hall, feeling the pull between us so strongly, I could not bear to hide it any longer. I'm not upset, Elena said, a soft smile touching her lips despite the exhaustion of the eventful day, frightened, perhaps, by the weight of what such a declaration means, but not upset. We will face whatever comes together, Adrian promised, pulling her closer. Whatever challenges arise from this bond, from your family's past actions, from the growing threats along the northern border, we will face them as partners, not as separate entities forced together by circumstance. Elena leaned into his embrace, allowing herself, for the first time since the humiliation of her stolen wedding, to fully believe in the possibility of a future built upon genuine love rather than arranged obligation. The pendant beneath her collar seemed to pulse warmly against her skin, as though acknowledging the truth that had finally been spoken aloud. Yet even as she allowed herself this moment of peace and hope, Elena could not entirely silence the small, persistent worry lingering at the back of her mind. Word of her presence within Adrian's territory, and now of their formally declared bond, would surely reach her father's pack before long, and when it did, she doubted very much that her father, or Damon, or even Vivian, would simply accept the news without some attempt to reclaim whatever advantage they believed they had lost. The peace she had found here, however genuine and precious, still stood upon uncertain ground, and Elena knew that the true test of her new life, and her new bond, had yet to arrive. News of the Alpha King's declared bond traveled faster than Elena had anticipated, spreading through the network of allied territories within days of the formal gathering. It was only a matter of weeks before whispers of the announcement reached the borders of her father's pack, carried by traveling merchants and messengers who moved between territories exchanging news along with goods. Colin was the one who brought the rumor to Damon's attention, finding his alpha alone in the study late one evening, poring over reports concerning the northern border tensions that had grown increasingly worrying in recent months. "There's word from the southern territories," Colin said carefully, closing the door behind him to ensure privacy. "The Alpha King has declared a mate bond. The woman's name is Elena." Damon's head snapped up immediately, every muscle in his body going rigid at the mention of that name. "Elena," he repeated slowly. "Our Elena." "The details match," Colin confirmed. "A woman who fled the Northern Territories months ago after a betrayal involving a stolen wedding. The timeline aligns perfectly with when Elena disappeared from our pack." Damon rose from his desk, pacing the length of his study with barely contained agitation. "She's alive," he said, more to himself than to Colin. "She's alive, and she's bonded to the Alpha King." "It would seem so," Colin said, watching his Alpha's reaction with careful attention. "Damon, there's something else you should know, something I discovered while investigating the circumstances surrounding your wedding to Vivian." Damon stopped pacing, turning to face his beta with sudden intensity. "What have you found?" Colin hesitated, clearly reluctant to deliver whatever news he carried. "I spoke with several pack elders who were present during the original marriage negotiations, years before your wedding was ever announced. Damon, the original agreement, the one your father and Edmund Hall negotiated when you and Elena were both children, specifically named Elena as your intended mate. Not Vivian. The switch was arranged entirely by Edmund and Vivian, in the final months before the ceremony, without proper council approval." The revelation hit Damon like a physical blow. "Are you certain?" "I have documentation," Colin confirmed grimly. "Letters between the pack elders, discussing concerns about the sudden change, concerns that were apparently silenced before they could reach your attention. Someone within our own council was complicit in covering up the switch." Damon's hands clenched into fists at his sides, a low growl building in his throat, as the full weight of the deception settled over him. "Elena was my intended mate," he said, his voice tight with barely controlled fury. "And I let her be dragged from that hall without a single word of defense, because I believed the council's decision carried legitimate authority." "You couldn't have known," Colin said, though his tone carried little genuine comfort given the circumstances. "I should have trusted my instincts," Damon said bitterly. "Every part of me recognized something was wrong that day, but I told myself the council's judgment outweighed my own feelings. I failed her, Colin. I failed the woman who was truly meant to stand beside me." Damon sank back into his chair, the weight of months of buried guilt finally breaking free. He thought of Elena's face in the moments before she was dragged away, the desperate hope in her eyes as she begged him to speak, to defend her, to acknowledge the bond they had believed existed between them since childhood. He had said nothing, and that silence had cost him more than he had ever imagined possible. "What will you do?" Colin asked quietly. "I need to speak with Vivian," Damon said, rising from his chair with renewed purpose. "And then I need to find Elena, to make things right, however that might be possible now." He found Vivian in her chambers, staring out the window with an expression of restless discontent that had become increasingly common in recent weeks. She turned as he entered, her eyes narrowing slightly at the unfamiliar intensity in his expression. "I know the truth," Damon said without preamble. "I know the original marriage agreement named Elena as my intended mate, and that you and your father conspired to switch the arrangement before the wedding." Vivian's face paled, though she quickly composed herself, lifting her chin with defiant pride. "Whatever agreement existed years ago was outdated," she said. "My father believed a stronger alliance was needed, and I was the better choice to secure that alliance." "You lied to an entire pack," Damon said, his voice dangerously quiet. "You let me marry you under false pretenses, knowing full well that Elena was the one truly meant to stand beside me." "And what would you have had me do?" Vivian demanded, her composure finally cracking under the weight of his accusation. "Stand aside and watch my sister claim everything, while I remained forgotten, overlooked simply because our father favored her bloodline connection to your family's original agreement." "You could have told the truth," Damon said. "Instead, you and your father orchestrated a public humiliation that destroyed her reputation and nearly cost her everything." Vivian's eyes flashed with something between anger and desperation. "She has clearly found herself a far better position than anything I could have offered her here," she said bitterly. Bonded to an Alpha King, no less. Perhaps you should be thanking me for freeing her from a lesser fate. Something in Damon's expression shifted, a cold clarity settling over his features. This marriage was never legitimate, he said. It was built on a lie that violated the original agreement between our families. I intend to bring this matter before the full council, Vivian, and let them decide how to address the deception you and your father orchestrated. You would destroy everything for the sake of a woman who has already moved on, Vivian asked incredulously. I would seek justice for a wrong that should never have been allowed to happen, Damon corrected firmly. Whatever exists now between Elena and the Alpha King is not my concern to interfere with. But the truth deserves to be known, and you and your father deserve to answer for the deception you orchestrated. Vivian's expression crumbled slightly, the confident mask she had worn for months finally slipping to reveal genuine fear beneath. What happens to me now? She asked, her voice smaller than Damon had ever heard it. That will be for the council to decide, Damon said, though his tone carried no sympathy for the woman who had spent months living a lie that had cost her sister everything. The following days brought a whirlwind of activity within the pack, as Damon formally brought the matter before the full council, presenting Colin's documentation regarding the original marriage agreement and the circumstances surrounding its violation. The elders who had remained silent during the original deception now found themselves forced to answer for their complicity, their reputations and positions within the pack hierarchy suddenly at serious risk. Edmund Hall, summoned before the council to answer for his role in the deception, attempted to defend his actions as necessary political maneuvering, insisting that Vivian's connections offered superior strategic value for the pack's future security. But the council, faced with clear evidence of a deliberately falsified agreement and the public humiliation inflicted upon an innocent woman, showed little patience for such justifications. You violated a binding agreement between two founding families, one elder said sharply during the proceedings, and allowed your own daughter to be publicly humiliated and cast out to cover the deception. This council cannot allow such actions to pass without serious consequence. As the council deliberated Edmund's fate and the future standing of both his family and Vivian's marriage, word began to spread throughout the pack of the true circumstances surrounding Elena's departure. Sympathy that had once been buried beneath fear of Edmund's authority began to surface openly. Pack members who had witnessed Elena's humiliation now speaking freely of their discomfort with what had transpired that day. Damon, meanwhile, found himself grappling with a complicated mixture of guilt, regret, and a stubborn hope that perhaps, despite everything, there might still be some way to make amends with the woman he had failed so completely. He knew Elena had found happiness with the Alpha King, that their bond had been formally declared before an assembly of allied territories. Yet some part of him could not entirely release the belief that Elena deserved to hear directly from him, to know that the truth had finally been uncovered, and that those responsible for her suffering would finally be held accountable. Against Colin's careful advice regarding the political complications such a journey might create, Damon made the decision to travel personally to the Alpha King's territory, determined to speak with Elena directly, to offer whatever apology and explanation might bring closure to the wrong he had allowed to happen. He told himself the journey was purely about delivering justice and truth, though a quieter, more honest part of himself acknowledged a lingering hope that perhaps, somehow, there remained a chance to reclaim what he had so carelessly let slip away. He had no way of knowing that his arrival at Adrian's territory would set into motion a confrontation neither he nor Elena could have fully anticipated, one that would force Elena to finally and completely close the door on the life and love she had once believed was her destiny. Elena was in the training courtyard, practicing a series of defensive maneuvers under the watchful eye of one of the palace instructors, when word reached her that a visitor had arrived at the border, requesting an audience, a visitor claiming personal connection to her and demanding to be heard. Her stomach tightened with instinctive dread the moment Nora relayed the message, some deep part of her already suspecting who the visitor might be before his name was even confirmed. Damon, Elena said quietly, the name feeling strange and distant on her tongue, after months of building a new life, far removed from her old one. The guards are holding him at the border for now, Nora said carefully. Adrian has been informed and wishes to speak with you before deciding how to proceed. Elena found Adrian in his study, his expression tense but controlled, as he reviewed a brief report from the border guards. He looked up as she entered, his golden eyes searching her face for any sign of how she wished to handle this unexpected complication. "He's asking to see you specifically," Adrian said. "Claims he has information regarding the circumstances of your departure that he believes you deserve to know." "What kind of information?" Elena asked, though a small, uncertain part of her already suspected the answer might involve the truth behind her family's betrayal. "He wouldn't elaborate to the guards," Adrian said. "Elena, this is entirely your decision. I will not force you to face him if you are not ready, nor will I turn him away without your consent if you wish to hear what he has to say." Elena considered the offer carefully, weighing months of hard-won peace against the lingering, unresolved questions that still occasionally surfaced from the wound of her humiliation. Ultimately, she decided that closure, in whatever form it might take, was preferable to allowing unanswered questions to linger indefinitely. "I'll see him," she said finally, "but I would like you present, Adrian, if you're willing." "Of course," Adrian said without hesitation, reaching for her hand with quiet reassurance. "Whatever you need." Damon was brought before them in the smaller receiving chamber, rather than the formal Great Hall, a deliberate choice on Adrian's part to keep the meeting more private and less politically charged than a full court audience would allow. Elena felt her heart pounding as the doors opened, and Damon stepped inside, looking older somehow than she remembered, his expression carrying a weight of guilt and exhaustion that had not been present during their years together. "Elena," he said softly, his eyes taking in her appearance with obvious relief and something that looked painfully close to regret. "You look well." "I am well," Elena said carefully, standing close beside Adrian, drawing strength from his steady presence. "What brings you here, Damon?" Damon glanced briefly at Adrian, before returning his attention fully to Elena, seeming to gather his courage before speaking. "I came to tell you the truth," he said. "The original agreement between our families named you as my intended mate, not Vivian. Your father and my council allowed a false switch to be made in the final months before our wedding, and I only recently discovered the deception." Elena's breath caught, old wounds threatening to reopen at the confirmation of what she had always suspected, but never had proof of. "You're saying I was truly meant to be your mate all along?" "Yes," Damon said, his voice thick with emotion. "And I failed you completely on the day you needed me most. I should have questioned the council's decision, should have trusted the connection I felt toward you for years, rather than accepting their judgment without protest. I have carried that guilt every single day since." "Why tell me now?" Elena asked, her voice steady despite the storm of complicated emotions churning within her chest. "Because you deserve to know the truth," Damon said, "and because those responsible, your father and Vivian, are being held accountable before the council for their deception. I wanted you to hear it from me directly, not through second-hand rumor or gossip." Elena absorbed this information slowly, feeling the weight of validation mixed with a strange, distant sense of closure regarding a wound that had shaped so much of her recent journey. "Thank you for telling me," she said finally. "It means something to know the truth was finally uncovered, even if it came far too late to change what happened." Damon took a hesitant step closer, something desperate flickering behind his eyes. "Elena, I know I have no right to ask this, but is there any possibility, any chance at all, that we might find our way back to what we once believed we shared?" The question hung in the air, and Elena felt Adrian's hand tighten slightly around hers, though he remained silent, allowing her the space to answer for herself without interference. "No, Damon," Elena said, her voice gentle but unmistakably firm. "I understand why you're asking, and I appreciate that you traveled here to tell me the truth. But too much has changed. I have changed. Whatever we might have shared years ago belongs to a different version of myself, one who no longer exists." "You're bonded to him now," Damon said, glancing toward Adrian with a complicated mixture of respect and lingering pain. "Truly bonded, not arranged." "Yes," Elena confirmed, meeting Adrian's eyes briefly before returning her attention to Damon. "In a way I never experienced with you, despite everything I believed for years. This bond was not built on politics or family expectation. It grew from genuine trust, honesty, and choice." Damon absorbed her words with visible pain, though he did not argue further, seeming to recognize the finality in her voice. "I understand," he said quietly. "I only hope you can find happiness, Elena, whatever form that happiness takes." "I have found it," Elena said simply. "Adrian has given me a life built on trust rather than obligation, and I would not trade that for anything, regardless of what might have been possible under different circumstances." Adrian finally spoke, his voice calm, but carrying an undeniable authority. "Damon, I appreciate you traveling here to deliver this truth, and I respect the courage it required to admit your own failures so openly. But Elena's answer is clear, and I trust you will honor it." Damon nodded slowly, accepting the reality he had perhaps already anticipated before making this journey. "I will honor it," he said. "Thank you both for hearing me out." As Damon prepared to depart, Colin, who had accompanied him and waited quietly near the chamber entrance throughout the exchange, stepped forward with additional news that had not yet been shared. "There's something else," he said. "The council has reached a decision regarding Edmund Hall and Vivian's futures within the pack." Elena's attention sharpened immediately at the mention of her family. "What decision?" "Edmund has been stripped of his council position and formal leadership authority within the pack," Colin explained. "The elders determined his actions constituted a serious violation of trust that could not be overlooked, regardless of his previous standing. As for Vivian, her marriage to Damon has been formally dissolved by council ruling, given that it was built upon a fraudulent violation of the original binding agreement." The news landed with unexpected weight, and Elena found herself experiencing a complicated mixture of emotions, some satisfaction at seeing justice finally served, but also a strange, quiet sorrow for the family that had once been hers, however deeply they had wounded her. "What will happen to them now?" Elena asked. "That remains uncertain," Colin admitted. "Edmund retains some standing within the pack, given his family's historical contributions, but his influence has been significantly diminished. Vivian, without the protection of marriage to an alpha, faces an uncertain future within a pack that no longer regards her with the respect she once commanded." Elena absorbed this news quietly, feeling the final threads connecting her to her old life beginning to loosen and fall away. Whatever satisfaction she might once have imagined feeling at her family's downfall felt strangely muted now, overshadowed by the genuine peace and belonging she had found within Adrian's territory. "Thank you for bringing this news," Elena said finally, addressing both Damon and Colin with quiet composure. "I wish you both well, truly. But my future lies here now, with Adrian." Damon offered a final, respectful nod before departing with Colin at his side, leaving Elena and Adrian alone once again in the quiet receiving chamber. As the doors closed behind them, Elena felt Adrian's arms wrap gently around her, offering silent comfort as she processed the weight of everything that had just transpired. "Are you all right?" Adrian asked softly. "I think so," Elena said, resting her head against his chest, listening to the steady, reassuring rhythm of his heartbeat. "It feels strange, having that chapter of my life finally closed so completely. But it also feels like relief, like I can finally stop carrying the weight of unanswered questions." "You handled that with remarkable strength," Adrian said, pressing a gentle kiss against the top of her head. "I am proud of you, Elena, and everything you have overcome to stand here today." Elena smiled softly, allowing herself to fully embrace the peace of the moment, knowing that whatever challenges still awaited them regarding the growing tensions along the northern border, she now faced them with a heart finally free from the shadows of her past, standing firmly beside the man who had proven himself worthy of the bond fate had chosen for them both. In the months following Damon's visit and the council's ruling regarding her father and sister, Elena found herself increasingly drawn into the responsibilities that came with her position at Adrian's side. What had begun as a fragile bond, forged in the aftermath of betrayal, had grown into something steady and strong, and with that growth came expectations that Elena had never anticipated needing to prepare for. Gideon approached her one morning as she reviewed reports alongside Adrian in his study, a practice that had become routine as Elena grew more involved in the governance of the territories under Adrian's protection. "There is a matter requiring your attention," Gideon said, addressing Elena directly rather than Adrian, a small but significant shift in how the palace advisors had begun treating her in recent weeks. Word has reached us that conditions within your former pack continue to deteriorate. The pack elders are requesting guidance on how to proceed regarding Edmund Hall's continued presence and Vivian's uncertain status. Elena set down the report she had been reviewing, giving Gideon her full attention. Why would they seek my guidance on such matters? I hold no formal authority within that pack any longer. Perhaps not formal authority, Gideon said carefully, but considerable moral standing, given the circumstances of your departure and the truth that has since been revealed. Many within the pack have expressed hope that you might offer some direction regarding how justice should ultimately be served. Elena glanced toward Adrian, uncertain how to proceed with such an unusual request. What would you advise? She asked him. This decision belongs entirely to you, Adrian said. You have every right to seek whatever measure of justice feels appropriate, given everything you endured. Equally, you have every right to release this matter entirely and focus solely on the life we are building together here. Elena considered the question carefully over the following days, weighing the lingering hurt of her betrayal against the peace she had worked hard to cultivate within her new life. She thought of her father's cold eyes as he ordered the guards to drag her away, of Vivian's satisfied smile as she stepped into a place that was never rightfully hers, and found that the anger she once carried had softened considerably, transformed by time and genuine happiness into something closer to weary acceptance rather than burning resentment. Ultimately, Elena requested a formal meeting with representatives from her former pack, choosing to address the matter directly rather than allowing rumor and speculation to shape the narrative any further. The meeting was arranged within Adrian's territory, a neutral setting that allowed Elena to speak from a position of security rather than vulnerability. Several pack elders traveled to meet with her, along with a subdued and visibly humbled Vivian, who had requested permission to attend, despite her diminished standing within the pack hierarchy. Edmund Hall himself did not attend, having withdrawn largely from public pack affairs following the council's ruling against him. Thank you for meeting with us, one of the elders said as the formal gathering began within a private chamber of the palace. The pack finds itself uncertain how to proceed regarding matters that ultimately began with the wrong done against you, Elena. We hoped you might offer some guidance. Elena studied the gathered representatives carefully before speaking, aware of Vivian's presence near the back of the chamber, her posture stiff with obvious discomfort and lingering shame. I do not seek revenge against my former pack, Elena said finally, her voice steady and clear. Whatever anger I once carried has largely faded, replaced by a life and happiness I never expected to find. However, I do believe the pack deserves a leadership structure built upon honesty and accountability, values that were clearly absent when my departure was orchestrated. The elders exchanged glances, clearly having anticipated a different response given the severity of the wrong done against her. What would you suggest then? Another elder asked. Continue the reforms the council has already begun, Elena said. Ensure that agreements between families are honored with integrity and that no one within the pack, regardless of status or influence, believes themselves above accountability for deception and cruelty. That is the justice I seek, not punishment directed at specific individuals, but structural change that prevents such betrayal from happening to anyone else within the pack. Vivian, who had remained silent throughout the exchange, finally stepped forward, her expression carrying genuine vulnerability that Elena had rarely witnessed from her sister during their years growing up together. Elena, she said quietly, I know I have no right to ask for your forgiveness, given everything I did to secure my own position at your expense. But I wanted you to know that I am truly sorry for the pain I caused you. Elena studied her sister carefully, searching for any trace of the manipulation and cold ambition that had once defined Vivian's actions. She found instead genuine remorse, hard-won through months of consequence and reflection, following the collapse of the life she had tried to steal. I appreciate you saying that, Elena said honestly. I won't pretend the wound you caused has fully healed, Vivian, but I no longer wish to carry anger toward you. I hope you can find your own path forward, one built on honesty rather than the ambition that led you astray. Tears gathered in Vivian's eyes, and for a moment, the sisters simply looked at each other, acknowledging years of complicated history and the painful chapter that had ultimately separated their paths so completely. "Thank you," Vivian whispered, "for your grace, even after everything." The meeting concluded with the pack elders committing to further reforms regarding leadership accountability and the honoring of formal agreements between families, changes that would ultimately reshape the pack's governance structure in ways that prevented the kind of deception that had once cost Elena so dearly. As the representatives prepared to depart, word arrived that shifted the entire atmosphere of the gathering. A messenger, breathless from hard travel, burst into the palace, requesting urgent audience with Adrian regarding developments along the northern border. "The rogue activity has escalated significantly," the messenger reported, once granted entrance to the chamber. "Multiple territories have reported coordinated attacks, far too organized to be simple rogue wolves acting alone. There are whispers that a rival Alpha King from the Eastern Territories may be attempting to expand his influence by destabilizing the neutral lands and smaller allied packs." Adrian's expression grew serious immediately, the peaceful atmosphere of the previous discussion giving way to the weight of looming conflict. "How significant is the threat?" he asked. "Significant enough that several allied territories are requesting immediate consultation," the messenger said. "This could develop into open conflict if not addressed carefully." Elena watched Adrian's expression shift into the focused, commanding demeanor she had witnessed during matters of governance, a stark contrast to the gentle, patient man who had courted her so carefully over recent months. She felt a surge of protective concern, aware that whatever conflict was brewing along the northern border would likely require Adrian's direct involvement, potentially placing him in significant danger. "I need to convene the council immediately," Adrian said, already moving toward the door, before pausing to look back at Elena, with obvious reluctance at having to cut their meeting short. "I'm sorry, Elena. This cannot wait." "Go," Elena said firmly. "I understand the weight of your responsibilities. We can continue matters here without you." Adrian pressed a quick, grateful kiss against her forehead before departing swiftly with the messenger, leaving Elena to conclude the remaining details with her former pack's representatives, amid a growing sense of unease regarding the larger conflict now looming on the horizon. As the elders and Vivian prepared to make their own departure, Vivian paused beside Elena one final time. "Be careful," she said quietly. "Whatever conflict is brewing sounds serious. I know things ended badly between us, but I do care what happens to you, Elena, despite everything." "Thank you, Vivian," Elena said, offering a small, genuine smile despite the tension gathering around the larger political situation. "Take care of yourself as well." As her former pack's representatives departed, Elena found herself alone in the quiet chamber, processing the strange mixture of closure and new uncertainty that the day had brought. The wounds of her past had finally begun healing in earnest, forgiveness extended where genuine remorse had been offered, justice pursued through structural change rather than personal vengeance. Yet even as one chapter of conflict closed, a new and potentially far more dangerous one had begun to unfold, one that would test the strength of her bond with Adrian and the security of the peaceful life they had worked so hard to build together within these territories. Elena made her way toward the council chambers, determined to stand beside Adrian as he navigated whatever challenges this emerging conflict might bring, no longer the frightened, betrayed woman who had fled through darkened forests months earlier, but a woman ready to claim her place as protector and partner to the Alpha King she had come to love with her whole heart. The council chamber buzzed with tension as Alpha representatives from allied territories gathered to address the escalating crisis along the northern border. Elena took her place beside Adrian at the head of the long table, no longer viewed as merely his companion, but as a genuine partner in the matters of governance that now demanded immediate attention. The reports confirm coordinated attacks across 3 separate territories within the past week alone, Gideon explained, spreading maps across the table that marked the affected areas with small red symbols. The pattern suggests deliberate strategy rather than random rogue aggression. Our scouts believe Alpha Marcus Thorn of the Eastern Territories is testing the strength and unity of our alliance before attempting a larger incursion. Adrian studied the maps with focused intensity. Thorn has grown increasingly ambitious in recent years. If he believes our alliance is vulnerable to disruption, he may attempt to pick off smaller territories one by one before any of us can mount a unified response. "What do you propose?" one of the visiting alphas asked. "A unified defense," Adrian said firmly. "We combine our forces at the most vulnerable points along the shared border, demonstrating clearly that any attack against one territory will be met with the full strength of every territory allied under this crown." Elena listened carefully as the discussion continued, offering occasional input regarding logistics and coordination that drew on skills she had developed through months of training and observation within the palace. Several of the visiting alphas seemed genuinely impressed by her grasp of strategic matters, a stark contrast to the dismissive treatment she had often received within her father's more traditional pack structure. Over the following weeks, Elena watched as Adrian worked tirelessly to coordinate the defense strategy, traveling between territories to personally oversee preparations and reassure anxious allies of the alliance's continued strength. She accompanied him whenever possible, her presence serving as a visible symbol of unity and stability that seemed to bolster morale among the warriors and pack members preparing for potential conflict. The confrontation, when it finally came, unfolded not through prolonged warfare, but through a decisive show of unified strength that ultimately convinced Alpha Thorn of the futility of his ambitions. Facing the combined forces of every allied territory positioned strategically along the contested border, Thorn's advance forces withdrew without engaging in significant conflict, recognizing quickly that the alliance Adrian had built remained far stronger than any disruption he had hoped to create. "It's over," Adrian said, returning to the palace after the final negotiations that secured a lasting peace agreement with the Eastern Territories. He found Elena waiting in the garden, relief washing over her features as he approached and pulled her into a tight embrace. "I was worried," Elena admitted, breathing in the familiar scent of him, grounding herself in the reality of his safe return. The reports made the situation sound increasingly dangerous. "The alliance held strong," Adrian said, "largely because every territory trusted that we would honor our commitments to one another, a trust that has only grown stronger throughout this entire situation." With the border conflict finally resolved and peace restored throughout the territories, Adrian turned his attention toward a matter he had been quietly planning for weeks amid the chaos of the northern crisis. One evening, as the palace grounds glowed beneath a canopy of stars, he led Elena toward the same garden bench where they had first acknowledged their bond months earlier. "Elena," he said, kneeling before her with a small box held carefully in his hands, "these past months have taught me more about strength, resilience, and genuine love than I ever expected to learn in my lifetime. You arrived in my territory as a stranger, wounded and betrayed, yet you have become the very heart of everything I value most. I am not asking you to become my mate, for that bond already exists between us, chosen by something far greater than either of us. Instead, I am asking you to become my wife, to stand beside me, not only as my bonded mate, but as queen of these territories, sharing in every responsibility and joy that title carries." Elena felt tears gathering in her eyes as she looked down at the ring nestled within the box. A simple but elegant band, set with a stone that seemed to catch and hold the starlight above them. "Yes," she said without hesitation, her voice thick with emotion. "Adrian, yes, I will marry you." The wedding preparations that followed brought a joy to the palace unlike anything Elena had witnessed during her time there, staff and warriors alike throwing themselves into the celebration with genuine enthusiasm for their beloved Alpha King's long-awaited happiness. Elena found herself surrounded by support and warmth as she prepared for the ceremony, a stark and healing contrast to the humiliation and betrayal that had marked her first attempt at marriage. Grace Hall arrived several days before the ceremony, having traveled from the Northern Territories at Elena's personal invitation, tears of joy streaming down her face as she embraced her daughter for the first time since that fateful night when she had helped Elena escape into the darkness of the forest. "You look radiant," Grace said, studying Elena with obvious pride and relief. "I always believed you would find your true path, even in the darkest moments after that terrible day." "I couldn't have survived that day without your help," Elena said, embracing her mother tightly. "Thank you for giving me the courage and the means to seek a better future." The wedding day arrived beneath clear skies, the palace gardens transformed into a breathtaking celebration space, filled with flowers, warm lantern light, and the joyful energy of hundreds of guests gathered from territories throughout the alliance. Elena stood at the entrance of the garden pathway, dressed in a gown far more elegant than the one she had worn during her first, disastrous attempt at marriage. Though the true beauty of this moment came not from the dress itself, but from the genuine joy radiating from everyone gathered to witness this union. As she walked down the flower-lined pathway toward Adrian, who stood waiting with an expression of pure adoration that left no room for doubt or hesitation, Elena felt the last remnants of her painful past finally settle into peaceful memory, rather than lingering wound. She thought briefly of the humiliation she had endured months earlier, of Damon's silence and her family's betrayal, and found that these memories no longer carried the sharp sting they once had, transformed instead into simply the difficult beginning of a journey that had ultimately led her to this moment of profound happiness. Adrian reached for her hands as she arrived at the altar, his golden eyes bright with emotion as their ceremony began, officiated by one of the eldest and most respected elders among the allied territories. Vows were exchanged with genuine sincerity, promises of partnership, honesty, and unwavering support, spoken not out of political obligation, but from hearts that had found their true match through circumstances neither of them could have predicted or planned. I, Adrian Vale, take you, Elena Hall, as my mate and my wife, Adrian said, his voice steady and filled with quiet conviction. I promise to stand beside you through every challenge, to honor your strength and your voice in all matters of our shared future, and to cherish the bond that fate chose for us, above any arrangement politics could ever have devised. Elena repeated similar vows, her voice carrying clearly across the gathered crowd, no trace of the fear and uncertainty that had once defined her relationship to the idea of marriage and partnership. I promise to walk beside you as your equal, your partner, and your queen, she said, to bring honesty and strength to everything we build together, and to never again allow silence or fear to stand where courage and truth belong. As the ceremony concluded, and Adrian gently claimed her lips in a kiss that sealed their union before the entire gathered assembly, applause and joyful celebration erupted throughout the garden, warriors and dignitaries alike sharing genuinely in the happiness of their beloved king and his newly claimed queen. The celebration that followed stretched long into the night, filled with music, laughter, and the warm camaraderie of an alliance, strengthened not only by shared strategic interest, but by genuine bonds of friendship and respect that had grown throughout the recent crisis. Elena danced with Adrian beneath the starlit sky, surrounded by people who had welcomed her not as a political curiosity or a wounded refugee, but as a woman worthy of respect, love, and genuine belonging. Later that evening, as the celebration began to quiet and guests gradually retired to their chambers, Elena found herself standing alone with Adrian near the edge of the garden, looking out over the peaceful territories that now fell under their shared protection and care. Do you ever think about that day? Elena asked softly, referring to the humiliation that had once defined the darkest chapter of her life. The wedding that never happened? Sometimes, Adrian admitted, wrapping his arms around her from behind, as they both gazed out over the moonlit landscape. Though I find myself grateful for it now, in a strange way. Without that pain, without that betrayal, our paths might never have crossed. Elena leaned back against him, feeling the steady strength and warmth that had come to define her sense of home and belonging. I used to believe that day destroyed everything I valued about my future, she said. Now, I understand, it simply cleared the way for something far greater than I ever could have imagined for myself. A future built on truth, rather than deception, Adrian said softly. A future chosen by love, rather than arranged by politics, Elena added, turning in his arms to meet his gaze fully. As they stood together beneath the vast, star-filled sky, Elena reflected on the incredible journey that had brought her from the devastating humiliation of a stolen wedding to this moment of profound joy and belonging as queen beside the Alpha King, who had shown her what genuine partnership and unconditional love truly meant. The pain of her past had not been erased, but it had been transformed, woven into the fabric of a story that had ultimately led her exactly where she was always meant to be. Somewhere far to the north, within the pack she had once called home, reforms continued to reshape leadership structures toward greater accountability, And even Vivian slowly began rebuilding her life around honesty rather than ambition, learning gradually from the painful consequences of choices made in pursuit of status rather than genuine connection. But here, within the warmth of Adrian's embrace and the peaceful beauty of the territory they now ruled together, Elena finally understood that the greatest victories in life often emerge not despite our darkest moments, but through them, shaping us into precisely the strength and grace required to claim the extraordinary futures waiting patiently for us to arrive.